Okay, we are good to start the webinar. Thanks for joining today's session. Today's session we are hosting for sales webinar, the sales leadership webinar, 7 best practices in solution selling. I welcome you all from Quint team. Thanks for taking out your time and joining this webinar. I will quickly take you through introduction about Quint, and then I will introduce you to today's speaker, and then probably we can start with the webinar. Yeah, so over the screen, you can see there are 3 speakers. Myself, Samir Bale, I am from Quint. I take care of business development and sales activities at Quint. I have been associated with Quint from past 8+ years. We have Mr. Pankaj Kejriwal, who is the CSO of TAL Success. TAL Success is a brand of Quint, which is hosting this webinar today on behalf of Quint. And of course, we have Timothy Sullivan, who is Vice President Business Development from Richardson Sales. I'll quickly take you through Quint journey. Over past 30 years, we have grown in leaps and bounds. We started our operations in Amsterdam in 1992, and we quickly, got onto the globalization as a Quint Academy in 2002. Looking at the expansion, we expanded our offices in India. Within India, we expanded in 5 metro cities in 2004. In 2016, which is another milestone where we have opted for digital transformation, looking at digital disruption. In 2018, we took over an organization called Paphos, which was into a technology and digital transformation. And in 2020, we bought over another organization called Anchorman, which is into data science, AI, RPA, ML activities. 2021, we launched People Aspect, which is a brand of Quint under TAL Success, which takes care of people behavior, people emotional intelligence, people assessment, leadership, and all other aspects to do with employees. This is a little bit overview about the TAL Success. TAL Success is the brand of Quint, and the Quint as an organization, most of you would be knowing, which is 30-year-old organization into IT-based practices. And we are in India since last 17 years, serving 1250+ customers. TAL Success has tied up with the world's top brands in their own areas like Omnia, TalentSmart, Pontefract, Richardson, Pearce, and ROI. And today we are fortunate to have a team from Richardson Sales, Mr. Tim, who is going to take this webinar and take us through some wonderful aspects of sales training and 7 best practices in solution selling. Here is a little bit about the Richardson Sales. Richardson Sales is a 40-year-old organization providing sales training and consultancy to various customers across the globe. They have about 900 global clients, and about 3 million participants have taken the advantage of sales training. There are various trainings which Richardson Sales provide, and there are wonderful interventions. I myself have experienced a lot of training from Richardson Sales, and that has given a lot of advantage to me in my sales learning. They are across 50 countries. They have about 130+ certified trainers on the board, and they teach in 23 languages. So this wonderful, remarkable achievement. We can also see there are a lot of certificates and there are a lot of trophies which they have won across the life of journey. So we are very, very fortunate to have Richardson Sales Performance team for today's webinar. They're going to drive us through wonderful sales experiences. Okay, here we go. So this is about our today's speaker. Our speaker is Timothy Sullivan, who is having about 4 decades of sales and business development experience. Currently, he is leading the sales team and business development at Richardson Sales globally, and he's having a wonderful experience and intervention experience in the sales per se. So without wasting much of time, I would hand over the baton to Team Sullivan to take this forward. But before that, let me just tell you that we have a question panel there. We have chat panel there in the chat box. So in between this session, we're going to ask a couple of questions. We're going to have a couple of polls. But if you have any specific questions with respect to today's topic, please drop in your questions, because we have Q&A session at the end, and we also have an exciting offer. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the session. Over to you, team. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, Pankaj and team. I'm very pleased to be here with you today. And I do have some, I think, interesting things to share with you as it relates to 7 practices in solution selling. These are best practices that you can apply immediately to make a difference in how you engage with your customers, to differentiate yourself and your value, and therefore to be more successful. As Samir mentioned, Richardson Sales Performance has been studying salespeople around the world for more than 40 years. And these are the essential practices that we have found that differentiate the top performing salespeople from those that are struggling, are not doing quite as well. So I hope that you'll take away at least 1 or 2 good ideas today that you can begin to apply in your own organization and in your own sales efforts. Let's start first with a poll, as we'd like to understand who's attending today. So if you could go ahead and complete the poll, that answer that makes most sense for your organization. We'd like to understand which department you represent within your organization. Are you in a sales role, a sales director or sales head? Are you in a business development role as a business development manager? Are you in human resources, learning and development, or talent development, or in delivery or operations, or another department? So Samir, if you could monitor the poll and we can share the results when those are ready.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Steve. So you have 1 minute to cast your vote. I already see a lot of interaction happening here with the screen. So I'll repeat the question. Which department do you represent within your organization? And here you have 5 options. Please do cast your vote. Okay, so this is pretty quick. We got fantastic and quick polls answers from all the participants. So the poll result, I'm announcing here the result. Highest, which is 50% of the audiences have voted for business development manager. They are in this bracket. Followed by 30% goes to sales director, sales head. And then 10% is delivery and operations, 7% HR, L&D and talent development, and 3% to others. So the highest goes to business development managers, which is with 50%, followed by sales director. Over to you, Tim.
That's fantastic. Well, those of you in a business development and sales director role, you'll get a lot of value out of this today. And I know for those of you who are in delivery and operations and in the learning and development or HR functions, you'll find this useful as well. So it's very helpful. Thank you for participating in that poll. So there are 7 things that I want to cover today. And I'm going to give you a quick overview of some best practices and approaches for helping you to engage with customers in a way that conveys the value of your solutions. Most salespeople do not do this. Most salespeople, quite candidly, pitch products and sell on price. And while there's nothing wrong with that, we find that it's not as effective. You're not as successful. You're not as able to differentiate yourself, to set yourself apart from other alternatives that are available out there. Those that sell a solution, that is an answer to a customer's problem or enabling them to capitalize on an opportunity they otherwise would have missed, and selling the value or the business impact of that solution on their business, are able to produce, according to our research, anywhere from 16 to 32% more per year than those salespeople who do not. So this makes a huge difference in your performance. And those that practice a solution-focused or solution-selling approach really differentiate themselves in 7 ways. So I want to show you some glimpses of how you can do that. Number 1, we want to show how solution sellers align with modern buyers. That's a core foundational principle of solution selling, is to meet buyers or customers where they are in their journey and then align our behavior to where they are in their evaluation. Also, solution sellers are very agile. They adapt to changing buyer needs very quickly. And there's an approach that can help you with being more agile and responding to customer needs. They're very good at stimulating buyer interest and curiosity. When they do prospecting, they're not just trying to get a meeting, they're also trying to stimulate interest and curiosity so that these customers you're talking to, the buyers you're talking to, will want to speak with you. They're also very good at providing insight and value to buyers when they communicate with them. We'll show you a model of what that looks like today. They're very good at gaining access to decision makers and building credibility with high-ranking buyers. If there's any one problem that we hear that salespeople are having today, it's getting access to high-ranking buyers in purchasing organizations. They're also very good at making decisions easier for customers, making it easier to buy. And we have a very easy technique that I encourage you to pay attention to today that will help you to overcome any last-minute hesitation on the part of buyers. And then finally, they're also very good at negotiating and closing sales opportunities, but not so much by discounting price, but by providing other alternatives that enable them to do so profitably. So let's go into each of these. So first of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about how solution sellers align with modern buyers. Now, when we buy anything, whether it's a house or an automobile or a solution for our business, or even something simple as buying breath mints at the store. So whenever we purchase anything, human beings go through 4 phases, and this can be done very quickly, or it can be done over an extended period of time. The first phase, which we call phase 0, is that you're either in a planning or a latent state. That is, you're thinking about doing something different, but you don't quite know what it is, or you don't even know that there's a different or better way of doing what it is that you do. And as you evaluate your strategies and your priorities, as you're in that state, you don't have a very firm idea of what kind of action you might want to take. When we discover that we have a critical business issue or potential missed opportunity, which we call a pain for short, a bad thing that is happening or might happen if we don't take action, at that point, then we enter into phase 1, where we really focus on determining our needs. What are the specific things we need to do to address that issue? And it takes a while for us to compile a clear picture of what those needs and requirements may be. Once we have those needs identified, then we can evaluate alternatives, which is the second phase of the buying process. And we can compare those needs to the available different kinds of alternatives. Those alternatives may include things that we can do ourselves, or maybe some in-house developed solutions, as well as those that we can purchase from outside solution providers and vendors. When we identify the right solution, the third and final phase is evaluating risk. And you'll notice that price is a factor here. Certainly when we're in the third phase, we want to make sure we get the best price, but price also plays a role at the beginning. We don't want to look at different kinds of solutions that are in excess to what we think our problem is worth. So price is important at the beginning when we're determining our needs, and at the end when we're evaluating risk. But the main thing that causes paralysis in that third phase, maybe you have a number of opportunities that you're working on right now where the customer seems to be frozen in this final phase and unable to make a final decision. And that's because they're evaluating risk. They're evaluating what is it going to take for us to implement this solution or adopt it in such a way that we can reap the value that we see is part of that solution. Now, the lesson to be learned here is that we as sales professionals can enter at any of these phases. We can engage with potential buyers when they're in phase 0, when they're not even thinking about doing anything at the moment. We can show them some better ways of doing things, and we can then get them to begin a new project and start this process. They can engage with us very early when we can help them to determine their needs, or we can engage in the second phase where they're evaluating various alternatives. We can even be called to participate in the third phase. I'm sure you've all had customers who have asked you just for a price quote. I only need a price quote. Well, that tells us that they're probably in the third phase. And if we can't help change their thinking or expand their thinking, then our chances of winning that business are lower. The earlier that you can enter into a buyer's journey, the higher the chance that you will have in winning that business. If you can help them to determine their needs and guide them through the rest of the process, you have a much higher chance. In fact, our research shows that between 85 and 92% of the time, if you can enter in at phase 0 or phase 1, then you will win that business. That percentage goes down as they're evaluating different alternatives, or if you get engaged in evaluating risk, then your win rate is going to decline to something below 20%. So getting engaged earlier is one of the lessons to be learned here, but you still have a chance even if you engage late in the process. Now, given that behavioral model, the question, of course, is when do you get engaged? So we have a poll here. I'd like to know, in your buyer's journeys, as you are engaging with your customers, when do your salespeople first engage most often? Are they engaging very early in phase 0? Do they engage most often in phase 1 when customers ask you to help them determine their needs? Are they asking you to engage at phase 2 when they're evaluating alternatives? Or do you find that you have most of your customers asking you to engage in phase 3 to evaluate risk and to ask for things like price quotations? So Samir, if you could tell us when people have completed that poll, I'd like to hear the results.
Sure, thanks, team. So you have 1 minute to cast your vote. Poll is open. You can see over the screen. Let me repeat the question. Poll. In your buyer's journey, when do your salespeople first engage most often? So there are 4 phases. Phase 0, latent state. Phase 1, determine needs. Phase 2, evaluate alternatives. And phase 3, evaluate risk. I can see activities, and I see that a lot of people have started casting their vote for this poll. 60% of the audiences have casted the vote. We request other audiences to please, attendees to please cast your vote. Okay, can we have the result, please? Okay, so we have a result. 55% of the attendees have voted for phase 1, which is determine needs, followed by 24% to phase 0, latent state. 21% have voted for phase 2, which is evaluate and alternatives, and 0% to phase 3. So highest goes to phase 1, determine needs, followed by phase 0 and phase 2. Over to you, team.
That's excellent. For those of you who are engaging earlier in the buyer's journey, your chances of winning that business are much higher. So I'm very pleased to see that so many of you are engaging earlier with customers. The number 1 answer that we usually hear is evaluate alternatives. Most salespeople are invited to participate when the customer is trying to look at various solutions. And so that means they're already halfway through their journey by the time they typically engage with us. So I'm very glad to hear that most of you here in this webinar are engaging earlier with your customers. So if we know where the buyer is when we first encounter them, if we can determine where in that model they are currently proceeding and how we can then align to them, then we need to adapt to their specific needs. And we can take some lessons here from current buyer behavior. I borrowed this from our colleagues over at Gartner Research. You know, it used to be that buying was a fairly linear process as we moved from the 4 phases: problem identification, looking at different solutions, selecting the supplier, making decision. But actually, the number of people that are involved in purchase decisions today has almost doubled in the last 3 years on average. Organizations are able to bring more people in. There's a lot of things happening in the background. A lot of this kind of activity is invisible to us as salespeople. And so we need to not only be able to help guide the customer through their buying journey, but we also need to help them build consensus inside their organization. And that means we need to be very agile to deal with each of these different kinds of buyer activities to make sure that it's still moving toward a purchase decision. So we can take a lesson here from agile software development. For those who aren't familiar, agile software development is a relatively modern way of building software applications. And rather than gather requirements and then work in a fairly linear fashion to create a software product, software developers today instead break the work down into short bursts of activity around a specific objective. And then as a result, they're able to build or adapt applications that are much more functional in a shorter period of time. Salespeople can adopt the same practice. If we think about how we engage with our customers as short bursts of activities around specific objectives, we can prepare, engage, and then advance the opportunity in a short period of time. So rather than think of the entire buyer journey as sort of a linear function, we can go backwards and forwards there. But if we can then prepare, engage, and advance around short bursts of activity to help move to the next phase, then we can help the buyer make progress. So modern buyers today, and specifically solution sellers today, understand that the buyer's journey can be quite complex. It can go back and forth. It's not as linear as it used to be. But if they can break down the buyer's journey into short bursts of activity, then they're much more likely to move that opportunity forward and build consensus inside the organization. The third best practice of solution selling is about stimulating buyer curiosity. Solution sellers are very good at making customers or potential customers want to know more about your capabilities and how you can help them. And frankly, the best way to do this is with a results story. And I have an example here of someone, a salesperson who's selling solutions in the manufacturing industry. And when they talk to a VP of sales, they can relate a comparable story of results. Let's say, hey, when we were working with another VP of sales in another company, they were missing revenue targets because they had bad data. We were able to give them the kinds of visibility they needed on that data by providing them with the capabilities to do that. And as a result, they were able to improve their sales by 5%. And the results story is a very powerful tool because the most important line on here is the result. And as a buyer is hearing this, they can put themselves in that situation and then begin to wonder, well, what if I were to address this issue in that way? What would a 5% improvement on revenues mean to me? Right? And then it's much easier for them to say, you know what, I should have the same kinds of issue, or I'd like to know more about that. So as we as salespeople, if I have a library of these kinds of results stories to stimulate buyer interest and curiosity, then they're much more likely to engage with me at sharing or admitting that they have critical business issues or potential missed opportunities that they're willing to share. So solution sellers are very good at collecting result stories. And if you don't have those today, my first bit of advice for you would be to collect as many as possible by talking to customers. The fourth best practice is about how salespeople provide insight and value. In fact, when we talk to our customers' buyers, that is those organizations that are selling things to their buyers, when we interview their customers, they tell us that they look for 5 things in modern salespeople today. Anyone who is buying something is looking for these kinds of characteristics. Number one, they expect sellers to understand their situation, to have knowledge about their situation. So you need to do research in advance as a result about their situation. They also expect sellers to understand their own capabilities, their own products, and their own services, of course. And of course, we're all fairly adept at doing that. And surprisingly, buyers also expect professional salespeople to have good selling skills. They expect sellers to be passionate about their products. You know, if you don't believe that what you have to offer can be of value to them, then they're going to have a hard time believing it too. And they also expect salespeople to have good people skills, to have good communication skills, both written and verbal, and both they can be empathetic and understand the different buying styles of different personalities and be able to align to it. And then finally, and this is fairly new, over the last few years, because buyers have access to so much information, they expect sellers to provide value from the very first minute that they engage with them. And they want to collaborate with sellers as experts to help build an optimal solution. So what this means to us as salespeople is, as I mentioned, you have to research the company before you engage with the buyer. They expect you to understand their situation from the very beginning of your first interaction with them. It also helps to research the individuals. You can go on LinkedIn and other services to understand the role of that individual, their perspectives. You can see if they're connected to anybody else who might be a competitor. It's very helpful to do some research on the individuals before you speak to them so you know who you're talking to. And then you should identify the capabilities that you think would be of most value to them. Rather than describe every offering that you have to provide to a potential buyer, it makes a lot more sense to filter that down to the very few that might be the most relevant in their particular situation. And buyers expect that. And then we need to prepare in advance by having clear, crisp introductory messages about who we are and what we can do, and what are some questions that we can ask in order to truly understand and confirm our understanding of that particular buyer's situation and what we can do to be of help to them. If you can manifest all of these behaviors in front of a customer, that means you're highly fluent, and buyers really like that. They like people who are situationally fluent about their situation and how you can be of most help to them. As we prepare for a potential sales conversation, it's very helpful to determine, well, what do I want to talk about first? And so a quick exercise that you can do if you've done research on a potential buyer before you have a meeting or a telephone call with them is to really try to understand what your differentiators are. What are the things that are going to be of most value to that customer and are which are also most unique for you? Those things that are high value to customers but are not things that really differentiate you, that are not really unique, those are commodity features and functions, and they're important, but they're not things we want to dwell on. Anything that's not of high value to the customer and not unique to us, well, frankly, you want to avoid talking about those things. We call them junk. And then those things that are highly unique, but not necessarily of high value, are really just cool features. They're things that set you apart. You might want to chat about those, but frankly, they're not as high a priority as the differentiators. And as we look at our different capabilities, and I'll just run through this example very quickly and look at what we have to offer, if we can then plot that out, the things that we want to focus on are the things that are the most differentiated for that particular customer. So this tells us what features and functions do I want to lead with questions to be able to guide the customer to my differentiators. This is a very helpful exercise. It really tells you what it is that you need to focus on first as you're engaging with customers in a sales conversation. Now, we have looked at thousands of sales conversations, and they always follow a very specific pattern, right? If we understand what the customer's pain is, if we've done the research in advance and we know what their critical business issue or potential opportunity, we might even have an idea of the scope or size of that particular business issue. Then when we engage with them, it's great to have a model of what an effective sales conversation looks like. And the first thing we want to do is understand what are the reasons why this particular customer is having that pain or problem. And so we want to solicit their buyer perspective. And the best way to do that is to ask an open question. You know, well, what's causing you to have this problem? Or why do you think this situation is as it is? What's causing this to happen? That's a good open question, and we have an opportunity then to solicit the input from our potential buyer. Then from there, we can then ask or share our seller perspective by asking some insightful questions. Well, you mentioned that it's because of this reason, but could it also be because of reason A, reason B, reason C, and also how often does that happen? How big is this problem? How frequently do we see this issue? In other words, what's the scope of the issue? So we can ask here about our differentiators that they may not currently have that might be a contributing factor for why they're having that particular problem. And then if we've paid attention and took good notes, we can then summarize. So you mentioned that the reasons for this particular issue are this plus the things that we discussed. Is that correct? And that just shows or confirms that you've heard them. You can then move to asking some open questions about exploring or positioning capabilities. Now, most salespeople, once you have a customer who said, yes, I have a problem and here are the reasons, the natural instinct of most salespeople is to say, great, I have this wonderful product. If you just buy this, it will solve your problem. But solution sellers don't do that. Instead, they ask an open question here. Well, what ideas do you have to address this particular issue? What are you doing now to deal with this issue? And then listen, and that will tell us where they are in the buyer journey. Are they progressing through where they've evaluated their needs? Are they looking at different solutions? Or they've already made some decisions about where they might want to go with this, and they're just trying to evaluate whether or not you can offer a more attractive or competitive price. So this is a very important question to ask because it will give us an idea of where they are in their buyer journey. But then we can say, can I suggest some ideas? And then we can go back to the reasons why they had the pain and say, well, you mentioned that you're dealing with this issue because of this reason. Would it help if you had this capability? Would that help you solve your problem? And here's where we really want to describe our differentiators from our differentiation grid. Then we can summarize and say, well, if you had the ability to do these things, would that help you to achieve your goal? And if we've done this successfully, then we have created a vision in the mind of our buyer about how your differentiators can help them to solve their problem. Now, this is a very easy model to learn, and it helps us to prepare the right questions to ask and the right differentiators to focus on, so that we can help to show the value of our capabilities. And it also feels good to the customer as you're going through this process because it's a truly diagnostic conversation. We don't want to prescribe something until we really examine the patient, as we say. So we are, this gives you an opportunity to do exactly that. In addition to being able to have good conversations, solution sellers are very good at gaining access to people with high influence and high authority. We call this gaining access to power. Power people are high-ranking decision makers with high influence and high authority. So we'd like to ask a question here. So what I'd like to hear from the people who are on the webinar today, how often do your sales team gain access to high-ranking decision makers? Is it about 85% of your opportunities? Is it between 60 to 85% most of the time, but not all the time? Is it about half the time, 40 to 59%? Is it fairly seldom, between 15 and 39% of the time? Or is it never to very rarely? How often are your people gaining access to high-ranking decision makers in your sales opportunities? And so, Samir, if you could guide us through this, let's see if we can get some, see what the answers look like here.
Yeah, thanks, team. Yeah, so poll is open. I would request everyone to please put your vote. I am repeating the question, which is poll number 3 for today's webinar. Our sales team gains access to high-ranking decision makers, and there are 5 options: 85%, over 85% of the time, between 60 to 85% of the time, 40 to 49% of the time, 15 to 39% of the time, and 1 to 15% of the time. I can see a lot of actions happening here. Started receiving vote from the people. We have 20 more seconds to close the vote. Would request everyone to please cast their vote.
I'm very curious to see the answers to these. So this is, thank you for participating.
So we have participants from Southeast Asia. We have participants from largely from India. We have participants from Europe. We have participants from Middle East. So we thank all the participants for taking out their time and attending this webinar. I think 80% of the audiences have casted their votes, so would request to display the poll result. Okay, so we have an interesting result here, team. So 33% is shared between two levels. 60% to 85% of time is 33% of people voted. 40 to 59% of the time, again 33% of the audiences have voted for, followed by 15% to 1 to 15% of time, and 11% of audiences have voted for 85% of the time, and 7% to between 15 to 39% of the time. So highest
Great.
goes to 40 to 49 and 60 to 85%. What do you think?
That's great. It's interesting because when we poll our customers, generally the number one answer is between 15 and 39% of the time. So this audience actually is a little more successful at gaining access to high-ranking decision makers. So I congratulate you if you are. That's fantastic. Of course, the higher that we can connect with inside a buying organization, the better the chance of winning business. And so solution sellers are very good at understanding what the relationships are inside a buying organization. So if I'm talking to a sales operations manager, for example, about a solution that I'm offering, and they want better sales data, I can do some conversations with them using the model that I showed earlier and determine what their reasons are. But then I also can understand that that particular business issue, that pain, connects to a VP of sales and is a contributing factor to something that they are measured and rewarded by, that is missing revenue targets. And in turn, that VP of sales pain or business issue becomes a critical business issue for the president or CEO or the owner of the business, where they're concerned about declining margins. And so doing something which we call a pain chain, how these different business issues, how the pains and reasons interact, if we can understand what that flow is, then it makes it easier for us to ask for access. Hey, as if I'm talking to a sales operations manager and say, you know, if we solve this problem about inaccurate critical sales data, then that will probably create value for your VP of sales to help them with missing their revenue targets. And that would make it easier for you to purchase this solution. Can we speak to that VP of sales to determine the degree to which this issue is causing that problem, and then so forth and so on. So you're demonstrating two things. Number one, you're demonstrating situational fluency by explaining how you understand how this can impact other people in the organization. But you're also providing a good reason for some of the operational level people that you're talking to introduce you to other players in the organization. And then they see you as more of a consultant rather than a salesperson, and you can track up the organization accordingly. This is a very good technique to understand who it is that you need to speak to and what to speak about when you connect with them. Also, when we are engaging with buyers, if I'm going to have a sales meeting with them, it's always good to have the end in mind. So the optimal result of any sales meeting is one that accomplishes all 7 of these things. Number one, it's good that if we have a buyer who admits that they have a problem that we can help them with, we can understand the reasons why they're having that issue. We have an idea of the capabilities that we can bring to bear to help them solve that problem. If we ask good questions, we can determine what's the reason why they're buying this and what the potential value impact might be. We can get them to agree to collaborate with us, but then also, if we can gain access to power, if we can say, I'm willing to help prove the value of my solution, in exchange for that, will you then introduce me to that higher ranking person? In other words, I can make a bargain for spending the time and effort to prove out the value of my solution in exchange for connecting. They may not want to introduce me right away to that VP of sales. We can say, well, great, maybe that's a little too early, but if we can show how we can address your issue, will you then introduce me to your VP of sales? And so if we can get access to the power people in the organization by bargaining proof of value of our solution in exchange for access. That is often very effective. And then we can have some suggestions of next steps. So if we have a good sales meeting, these are the things that we want to collect. And after we have a sales meeting or conversation, you should always follow up. One thing that we find is that top performing salespeople always follow up after every meeting or telephone conversation with a summarization of what happened in that meeting. And this is a good format to use for that follow-up email. We want to focus on the pain or problem that we identified, the reasons that are causing them to have that issue, the capabilities we can bring to offer. Is there any compelling reason to act or a deadline that they need to act by? We get their agreement to continue. Then we also ask for access to power, and you can see here, you said that if we succeed in proving we can give you these capabilities, you'll introduce me to this higher ranking person, et cetera, and so forth. And then we can then talk about, all right, what's the next step in our process? The sixth thing, or the sixth best practice of solution sellers, is they can make buying decisions easier for customers. In fact, the #1 competitor of most salespeople today is not another vendor or an alternative. It's the customer's decision to do nothing. That is, to just stay with the status quo and not decide to do anything different. In fact, we find that in some industries, over half of the kinds of purchase decisions that we're asking customers to make result in no decision at all. And so there are various things that we can do as solution sellers to reduce the chances of them being paralyzed at the end as they're evaluating the risk of a purchase decision. We have to first understand that every sale has 3 sales within it. That is, there are 3 different purchase decisions that customers are evaluating in order to make a decision to purchase your capability. The first is they want to look at operational issues, or conceptually, does your capability, does your offering, does your service or product work exactly as you described? They conceptually want to understand and have some proof that you will able to provide the kinds of capabilities that you're talking about. And so we might want to think about things like demonstrations or customer visits or site visits or white papers that describe how we solved other problems, results stories, et cetera, that show operationally how we can solve problems. And most salespeople are really good at this. They understand their capabilities, they can describe and they can prove out that the capabilities they're representing will work as advertised. One thing that the salespeople are not particularly good at, though, is painting a clear picture in the mind of buyers about how they're going to get to this new way of doing things. In other words, how do I implement this solution successfully, and how do I transition from where I am now to where I need to be? And these are things like, do I need to retrain people, or do I need to have new people? What do I do with the old ways of doing things, and how do we migrate things that I want to preserve from the old way of doing things to the new way of doing things? Salespeople need to think about those issues and paint a clear picture in the mind of customers about how they can transition to adopt and implement your solution successfully. And then finally, is there enough value? Is there a financial case for making a decision to purchase your solution? If the salespeople don't convey the value of their capabilities to a potential buyer, then they have to do the analysis themselves, and oftentimes they're not particularly good at it. So there are 3 sales within every sale: addressing the operational issues, proving the value of our capabilities, the transition issues. In other words, how do we help the customer to implement our solution and begin to see value from it? And also, have we made a good business case, and is it sufficient for the customer to take action? Now, if there's any one thing you take away from this webinar today, it's what you're seeing on the screen today. We call this a collaboration plan, and this is a fairly complex one for a fairly robust solution. Yours can be shorter if it's not as complex, or there are fewer people involved in the purchase decision. But as that customer enters into that evaluating risk phase, or they're looking at various parts of your solution, they're evaluating different solutions. In other words, phase 2 or phase 3 of that buying process we described earlier, it's often very helpful for us as sales professionals to say, when we are working with customers who are evaluating the kinds of capabilities that you're looking at, these are the kinds of things that those customers like to do in order to address all of the risks that they see in making this purchase decision. In other words, we give them a collaboration plan that addresses all three of the elements of a sale within a sale. In other words, for example, the financial case, if we can identify what the success criteria are, right? We can agree on the success criteria and how they're going to measure the value of that solution and provide some guidance there, then that will help to address the financial issue. Or operationally, we might talk to various people in the organization and then provide some capabilities via demonstration or some other method to be able to show that we can actually deliver. Or in transition, talk about implementation, for example. What are we going to do to actually install and to make this solution work for you? Now, your criteria, of course, are going to vary depending on the kinds of solutions that you offer. But if you can give them a plan of how to evaluate that. Now, the best thing that happens is once you give this to a customer or a buyer, it's actually good if they push back a little bit. If they say, well, I don't know if I can do all of this, or if I can't do it by these dates or involve all these people in this time frame. So great, if they can make some changes, and this is one of the reasons why you put draft on this. You want the customer or the buyer to make changes, but then once they make those changes, then this plan becomes their plan. And it's much more likely that they will then execute to this plan, and then our business becomes much more predictable. So if you're having trouble with forecasting accuracy or being able to predict future revenues, the collaboration plan, if you can get customers to work with you to create a plan that you can both agree upon, that's a great way to help improve the predictability of future business. The seventh best practice that I want to touch on is how to negotiate and close profitably. Most salespeople discount on price, and a certain amount of price discounting is necessary, and I don't want to diminish that, but solution sellers find a way to negotiate and close in a way other than price. And so there's a tool that we recommend that we call a negotiation preparation worksheet. And you can look at this presentation later, and you can borrow from this if you wish, but there are three questions here that we want to ask. First of all, is the business closable today? And the answers to that is dependent upon, number one, are we talking to people with the right power? Do they have enough influence and authority to actually make a purchase decision? Do they understand the value of the solution, and do they know what the payback is? Have we completed all of the approvals in our collaboration plan with legal, technical, administration, and other functions? Have we completed all the steps that are necessary for them to come to a decision? And how long have they known the cost? We don't want to reveal the cost in the final negotiation. We want to give them some time to understand what the cost is going to be so that they can socialize that and agree upon that. If the answer to all of those questions is yes, then it is closable today. If there's anything that's been left off here, then we have a little bit more work to do. Also, before we enter into a negotiation, we need to prepare stands. That is, we need to prepare statements that we can use to deflect requests for discounts or concessions. For example, if someone asks me for a discount, I can say, well, our mutually agreed upon plan shows that the kickoff of this project is starting on this date. Is this issue worth that kind of delay? Now, I can use that stand with any kind of a request for a discount or some kind of concession. And the point is that we want to deflect some of those with things that are relevant to this particular purchase decision or project. After I work through various stands, then I can say, well, I understand your position. Let's see if we can work something out together so we can move ahead. The buyer will ask, like, what do you have in mind? And then we as salespeople can say, is it possible for you to do something? And we call those various gets. That is, what are the things that we would like to get that from the customer that are a relatively low cost to them, but high value to us? For example, can we extend the term of the contract, or are they willing to be a success story or a result story for us in the future? Will they give us exposure? Will they introduce us to other people? It may be any number of things that are valuable to us. and but easier for them to do. And if they can agree to that, then you can say, well, great, then I'm willing to do some things that we know are of value to you, like maybe some additional training or some additional consulting, et cetera, and so forth. Now, notice that isn't necessarily a price discount, but they're of high value to the customer and relatively easy for us to do. So if we can do an equal exchange of gets and gives, then the customer feels like they're getting a good value for the money for your solution, and you're getting some equal exchange as well, things other than price. So we've covered 7 different best practices today of what effective solution sellers do. They understand where the buyer is in their journey, and they align their behavior accordingly. They organize their work activity in short bursts so they can be agile and respond to different changes in customer requirements as they're going through the buyer journey. They're very good at using results stories to help stimulate buyer interest and curiosity. They have a structure for providing insight and value to buyers when they converse with them, focusing on your differentiators. They're good at gaining access to decision makers by using techniques like a pain chain and bargaining for access to those people in exchange for proof of value of your solutions. They also make buying decisions easier by using a collaboration plan to guide them to a decision and overcoming those 3 sales within a sale. And they also prepare and execute negotiations and closing of sales opportunities in a profitable fashion. So those are the 7 best practices, and I hope you took away a couple of things that you can apply right away. So let me turn it over to you, and Samir, I'm going to stop sharing here and turn this over to you. So let me flip this to you now.
Hey team, thanks so much. Thank you so much for this wonderful session. And as I mentioned, I had already undergone some of the training sessions of Richardson Sales, and those are really, really enlightening. I can see a change in my sales approach, my overall business development activity, and that has been a very good learning. So now moving forward, we have 2 more activities, and then we conclude with the offer which we have for the attendees. Over the screen, you can see that this is the 4th poll, and this poll is about understanding your interest and understanding your inclination to gain more knowledge, making yourself more stronger, better in approaching customers and handling better sales pipeline, conversions, and so on and so forth. So here are 3 things which you can see over the screen, and I would request all of you to please put your vote. Are you interested in sales training for your organization? Do you want us to call, do drop an email, or send a message? If you're interested in sales training, do share relevant details. We will share the relevant details. And if you're not, you can just pass it. So I would request all the attendees, those who are attending this session, to please put your vote. And then probably in half a minute, we will move on to the next session. The next session would be announcement of an exciting offer for the sales training. And then I would then hand over this baton to my colleague Pankaj, who would take care of Q&A session. We have been receiving a lot of questions across the world. Participants have been attending this session in odd times. We thank all the participants. There are participants from Middle East, Europe, US, of course, India, Southeast Asia. So once again, on behalf of Queen team, I thank everyone. And then we can close this poll, and we will probably like to move forward to Pankaj and to take this forward.
Thank you, Samir. Thanks a lot. Have we done with the poll, Samir?
Yeah, I think we are about to close the poll, and then probably move on to the next session. So, as I mentioned, there are 2 agendas left, for this.
Yes, I think I have received various questions, Samir. Thanks a lot, first of all, Tim, for taking this insightful webinar. These are some of the real best practices which you have shared today in terms of putting up the entire sales process. And I really agree with you that if you follow these process, your chances of getting the customer is much higher than without following a process. Tim, we have received various questions. The first question which I have received is that people who are like on the client side, people who are trained, highly trained on negotiation side, right? How do we, they are so well trained uh, that they don't budge, they don't give away anything. There are various sophisticated techniques which are available. So how do you gate pass those, how do you win those negotiations? They want to take everything from you and they don't want to give you anything.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we find that the
Tim,
solution sellers that prepare in
Tim, can you hear
advance.
me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Samir, am I coming through?
Yes, we
Yes,
can. I can hear you, Tim.
Okay, great. So as I was saying, salespeople that prepare in advance for those negotiations by using the negotiation worksheet that I mentioned, that is preparing stands to deflect those requests for concessions or discounts. That's very helpful. You need to have statements that, of course, relate to the value of your solutions. And then also preparing the gets and gives. In other words, we don't give anything until we make sure that we get something first. In other words, what are the things that we can request that are low value, that are low cost for the seller to give, but it's things that we would find useful and valuable. And then once they agree to that, then we can exchange other concessions that are high value to them in their particular project. So one of the things that I find that differentiate true solution sellers from other kinds of salespeople is that other kinds of salespeople are they think that they can offer a discount or offer a concession first, that they can help move the buying process along. Solution sellers don't do that. They understand that buyers are going to ask for concessions, they're going to ask for discounts, but we've got to have something of equal exchange or value that are going to be easy for them to offer to us. And unless you ask, you don't get those things. So it's really a question of being disciplined about preparing and planning for that negotiation discussion. And that worksheet can certainly help you with that. And then sticking to that, sticking to the concept of, I'm going to give you things, but in exchange, I want something of equal value. And then you can end up with a much more profitable way of generating new business and closing that business effectively.
Thank you, Tim. This is really insightful. My second question is, a lot of time, especially in the big ticket item or in large sales, where the buyer has their own sophisticated process, right? And if they have their own process, they raise an RFP. You have to go through RFP, and without that, and if you try to follow your own sales process, then it becomes very difficult. How do you uh, how do you work and navigate in this kind of scenarios, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, RFPs or requests for information or tender offers, whatever you call them, RFQs, requests for quotations. Certainly, procurement and purchasing departments are going to be managing those, and they want to control the purchase process. But we as salespeople bring value to understanding and diagnosing the customer's issues and then prescribing the right solution. One of the ways that you can respond to an RFP is to say, we're very happy to participate in the RFP, but there are a number of questions we have here that are not addressed by the document. For example, why are you doing this? What's the underlying reason? What's the motivating factors? Who are the potential beneficiaries? How much will they benefit, etc. And so before we prescribe a solution, we need to diagnose the situation, diagnose the patient. Otherwise, we're basically conducting malpractice. So will you give us access to stakeholders? And sometimes what they will do as a result is create a buyer's conference where they might bring in a variety of different people in the organization, and they may also share that information with other competitors, and that's okay. You can compete on your differentiators. But to simply respond to an RFP and play by their rules, basically they're asking you to prescribe a solution before you really understand all of the implications or issues. And it really is to the customer's benefit, to the buyer's benefit, to grant you access so that you can prove out the right kinds of solutions and create an optimal solution for them. And so you need to state it in the form of a benefit. Now, will they participate in that or not? That's another question. Then you've got to have a question of, well, do we walk away from this business? If we don't have enough information here for us to even provide a meaningful solution, then perhaps we don't participate. Now, if you do that, I would bet that in many cases the customer will say, well, why are you walking away? What do you need in order to participate? Because they want those quotes, right? They need to have those
Yes,
prices to
absolutely.
compare. Yeah, so that it's something that they will oftentimes say, okay, well, what do you need, and come to a reasonable accommodation.
Thank you, Tim. I think we have a paucity of time. I think we need. So we have received tons of questions. We will respond by an email to all this. So thanks to everyone for asking the questions. Before we close this webinar, we have two exciting giveaways. First, people who are able to attend, they will get a complimentary access of our e-learning module and also we are giving 50% off on the sales workshop by Richardson, which we are launching soon. So thanks once again for joining this, and thanks a lot, Tim, and the audience today, and thanks for taking this solution selling.
Yep.
We're just signing
Thank
it
you,
off
everyone.
now. Thanks once again.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.